One of our Fox producers, on whose show I'm going to appear in a little while, asked me to summarize this in a couple of one-liners. And I said, the government knows best, the Constitution be damned, and forget about rational thinking. Now, how did a generation of Americans come to this point that we would believe or want to believe that the government knows best, that the sheet anchor of our liberty, which was written to restrain the government, be damned, and that rational thinking can be kicked out the door?
This isn't one generation. This is a slow process this country's been moving towards since the progressives, since Teddy Roosevelt in the early part of the century. We have been moving to this point. FDR had a massive book of regulations that we're suffering from today, caused the S&L crisis, to a large extent was responsible for the crisis we're facing today. Regulations written 70 years ago are responsible for what's happening today. So this isn't new. This is just another layer. It's worse. It's growing. And nobody's challenging it, and I think because nobody is willing to challenge.
Yeah, what happens?
Would you challenge those regulations?
The culture.
Would you challenge those regulations, please, that tell you hired too many people
I
because you wanted to give them jobs in a recession?
We should be challenging all regulations.
But try to do that in an American court where there's no more justice, there's no respect for the law. I mean, the problem is we pass huge regulations. The regulations create problems, and then the solution is never to repeal the regulation, but we just need even more. I mean, Bernie Madoff happened right under the SEC had been auditing him.
Under its nose.
Meanwhile, look at all the lousy investment advice. Look at all the people who lost tons of money in the dot-coms, the people who were steered into auction rate preferreds and subprime mortgages. All of this in a highly regulated industry. More regulation is not the answer. It's less, because we need individuals to regulate the market. We need more people looking out for themselves instead of abdicating that role to the government.
Absolutely. The one thing the government needs to do is protect individual rights. That's the one responsibility.
That's its only legitimate function.
The only legitimate function the SEC should have, if such an organization should even exist, is to find the Bernie Madoffs and put them in jail. Instead of that, they're so busy with 13 Ds and 15 Fs and going after Mark Cuban for supposedly insider trading, all that nonsense, that they can't see a crook who, you know, they got a whole memo from a hedge fund guy telling them the exact way in which this guy was running a pyramid scheme. They couldn't even find that.
Put your philosopher hat back on. Is this hopeless?
No. It's not hopeless, and there's some positive signs out there. First of all, there are more people speaking out than ever before. There are more people who understand what's going on than I think ever before. And, you know, I'm from the Ayn Rand Institute, and Atlas Shrugged is selling like hotcakes right now.
Oh, man.
It is. Last year was the best year ever for Atlas Shrugged. We're talking about a 52-year-old book. Sold
That's 1,000 pages long.
1,100 pages long. Sold 200,000 copies last year. This year, 200,000 last year. This year, it's running at a rate of 600,000. That is a triple last year's rate. If we can sell 600,000 copies of Atlas Shrugged in the bookstores, not copies I'm handing out or anything, in the bookstores, there's hope. I'll also tell you this, because of the programs we put together, we have 1 million kids every year in high school reading Ayn Rand as part of the English curriculum. I think if you project 10 years out, 15, 20 years out, there's real hope. Short term, it's a disaster.
Do you see any hope? Ron Paul sees none. Ron Paul sees this thing passing through the House with an hour debate on each side, the most fundamental change in the economy in 70 years, and it'll probably happen in the Senate with a little bit more debate, but they'll figure out ahead of time what they're going to vote for. Do you see any hope amongst people with whom you associate in the free market corners of the earth?
Well, I mean, there's always hope. The question is, you know, what are the odds here? You know, how rational is it? Unfortunately, it's a slim chance. I mean, it's not a zero chance that we can, you know, get the government to turn on a dime and do a 180 and change these destructive policies. But unfortunately, the situation we have right now is the more damage the government does to the economy, the more power they're able to usurp, the more regulations they pass, the more damage they do, and they're going to drive this economy into the ground, and we're going to suffer an inflationary depression that is going to make anything that we've experienced in this country before look tame.
If you could change anything with the stroke of a pen, what would it be to make us more free? Or is there too much?
I don't know. I need a lot of strokes, but I'd like to abolish the income tax and the payroll tax and the estate inheritance tax, and maybe try to abolish that Commerce Clause from the Constitution that has been so distorted.
Or at least define what
I mean,
what it
there are a number of
means.
things that need to be rewritten in the Constitution to separate. I think ultimately we need a separation of state from economics. But I would start with spending. I think the essence of spending. You cut taxes and cut all that, but unless you cut government, I would slash all government spending by 10% every year.
As
for
we
the
would
next
get rid of
8
the
years.
Commerce Clause, then potentially we get rid of it all, because that's how they justify all the spending.
The Commerce Clause is a clause in the Constitution which grants to Congress exclusive authority to regulate interstate commerce. And when, of course, it was written, regulate meant to keep regular. That is, to make sure that the states didn't impose tariffs upon each other. So if you want to go from New York to New Jersey with some fruit in the back of your truck, you didn't have to pay a tax for the privilege of entering into New Jersey. Congress has taken the word regulate to mean control in any way possible.
Or the courts.
Control the way it's been manufactured. Control what the price is. Control the wages of the people who produce it. And the courts have let them do it.
And then tax it and do whatever they want. And also the same thing with the General Welfare Clause, which now means that the government can do whatever it wants. So, I mean,
There's no constitution anymore. The government, we become a
I
democracy.
am very sorry to hear you say that, and I'm sorry to say that I agree with you.
I mean, we become a democracy. 51% of the people want to turn my house into a basketball court. They can. The fact is that there are almost no individual rights left, and the fact is that there's nobody in politics today defending individual rights. There are people talking about state rights, this right, that. The essence is individual rights, and we need to start defending individual rights. That's what makes this country unique. That's what makes this country different than any other country in the world, and better than any country in the world. That we still have a remnant, that we still can talk about
also,
individual
People
rights.
like
we need
Ron
to-
Paul, but there's only a couple of dozen folks like him in all of
we
the
need to
Congress.
take away the power of the Fed to borrow money. In addition, I mean, got Congress to borrow money.
Phase
But
them
to
out.
They
take
should not
away-
be able to borrow money.
But we're talking about taking away the power of the Fed to borrow money. I could not
Yeah.
agree more. And the president and the Congress want to give the Fed the power to regulate Ma and Pa and
I'm talking about
McDonald's
the Treasury.
and
If the
everything
government,
else.
look, we're a big country. If the government wants to pay for something, raise taxes. If there's something that's so important
Make
that
it
needs to be funded, and I don't like this idea. They'll always try to say, well, we're making investments in the future, and therefore we should. Well, why can't we make investments for our kids? If something is so important, why can't we give it to our children free of debt? Why do we have to borrow so much money and now have to pay for it over and over and over again with interest?
Your Honor, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I mean, there's so many things.
Use the word hope.
I mean, I think there is long-term hope. I think there really is a movement in this country that's fed up with both the Democrats and the Republicans, fed up with the growth of government, fed up with the intrusion of government in every aspect of our life. And what we, who are defenders of liberty, need to get going with is a real program to phase this all out, to come up with a real plan. How do we phase out the Federal Reserve System? How do we phase out Social Security? It doesn't need more monitoring, because I don't want Barney Frank monitoring the Fed. What the Fed needs is to be abolished and to find a way to phase it out.
But without replacing it with something worse.
No, and leaving it to private banking, leaving it to what we had before 1913. We had a phenomenal financial network pre-1913. The only problem then is you had state regulations on banks, which need to go as well. But we need to have a program for phasing out all these government controls instead of the exact opposite, which you have in front of you.
You're on, Brooke, the president of the Ayn Rand Institute, my good buddy Peter Schiff, president of Euro Pacific Capital. Thanks very much for joining us. Very lively and informative conversation.